remembered him in a poem. The death of the referee. A shroud for spring-heeled Jack, the only honest referee. A crowd to keep the devil back and sing in tune, Abide with me. The pit unlocks its cage of doves to tumble in the dirty air. And far below, the coffin drives to meet the council and the mayor. The barges drag through still canals, milky with clay and black with coal. And as the varnished coffin falls, the mayor proclaims the grave no go. For Jack is dead, the man on springs whose whistle trapped the wildest ball, whose portrait done in oils now hangs forever in the Civic Hall. Burly with cataracts, the eyes are blind at last to local fame and friends who fail to recognize a stranger in the golden frame. But those who know their loss will make the winter field his funeral and peel their caps to spring-heeled Jack while brass bands play the march in Saul. Those grand and sonorous hymns spoke directly to me, both as music and as poetry. And years later, I was reminded of that line about dwellers all in time and space. We were all dwellers in time and space, I thought, but each of us separate in our dispositions and desires. I saw us leaping or limping through infinity, the stars at our back and fathoms of air at our feet. When we traveled in pairs, it was for fear of the dark. None of us wanted to be alone. But the partnerships were of necessity or for convenience. Nothing endured. There was no permanent shelter.
We pray today for the life and work of our school, for those who teach and those who learn, and for all past members of the school.
Nothing endured. I discovered that was true when, shortly before my 13th birthday, I was expelled from the Royal Orphanage School, Wolverhampton. My crime was to have written a letter to my mother, in which I repeated a rumor that the headmaster had diverted a sum of money donated by an old boy for a school outing. I don't suppose it was true. I'm quite sure it wasn't important. But my mother was appalled. As a former headmistress, she regarded my tale as a slur on her profession. And her brother Percy, a headmaster himself, agreed. In fact, said Percy, what I had written could most probably be construed as libel. But instead of telling me simply not to be a fool, they forwarded my letter to George Gibbs, the Midland baritone, the man I had supposedly libelled. And he decided, quite properly I'm sure, that I must go. I won't pretend that I was sorry, but all the same I felt betrayed. Even more so when 3 months later I found myself in another orphanage, this time on the Lancashire moors, where I remained until I was old enough to leave school, and came to London, where, step by step, I worked my way into Fleet Street and a life in journalism. My mother often told me of the pain I caused her. I'm sure she was speaking the simple truth, but she had no idea of the pain she caused me. We'd grown apart. And although neither of us could properly be blamed, the gulf grew wider with every passing year. In several ways, writing these autobiographies helped to close the gap. They forced me to reconsider events and examine feelings I'd suppressed for years, so that instead of anger, I felt pity. Instead of guilt, compassion. My mother spent the last year of her life in a nursing home in Newcastle-under-Lyme. She took with her a few of her belongings, the autograph album, a hand mirror, and a box of photographs. The hand mirror was abandoned. She hated the sight of her own reflection. But each day, she studied the photographs as if they were a family archive. They were in no particular order. portraits of her parents taken 50 years earlier, snapshots of me in my pram and in the army, a picture of my mother in nurse's uniform, and a sepia print of a Sunday school outing in which girls wearing hats like wedges of puff pastry sat beneath the extended branch of a giant yew along which young men in stiff collars positioned themselves, grinning nervously into the vanished sunlight. I can see her now, tracing each image with her fingertips. She was touching past happiness, and she needed all she could find. I wish we could have talked more, but most often when I went to see her, we did no more than hold hands and listen to the bird song flooding in from the garden. She was 70 when she died, and I suppose at the very end we'd reached a state of truce. I wasn't the son she'd hoped I would be, but it could have been worse. She approved of the girl I'd married. In fact, she was amazed I'd chosen so well. She was moderately proud of seeing my name in print, although she never read the articles I wrote. She was proudest of all of seeing my first book of poems published, although she confessed, rather belligerently I thought, that she didn't really understand any poetry. I doubt whether she'd have understood this one, which I wrote years after she died. It's called From the Train. You will never find the place on foot. Fields defend it. The trees have been trained to move in clumps, that spinney acting as decoy, while the other flits out of view. The house also can disappear at will, timbers and brick dissolving, the roof soaking into the sky, leaving no stain for birds to bump into. Trust in the fact that when you've gone, everything will reassemble. Chimneys reconstitute themselves, roots carry on drinking, clouds cross the horizon. All of summer will continue. What you have seen is a memory, glimpsed from a train as England unspools between orchards and quarries like cupcake, and meres ornamented with swans slide past the window. Even if you're light at the next station, consult maps and offer bribes, no one can help you. Back, further back, they'll say, pointing past signal box and junction. The place you seek is behind you. Sometimes it's further than you think. I called these 3 volumes of autobiography memories because I didn't want to be tied down to exact documentary details. If you're writing about things that happened 30 or 40 years ago, you can be wrong about names and dates and specific events. As it turns out, I was pretty well right about most of them. But revelations turn up when you least expect them. This is my entrance form to the Bluecoat School in 1936. For nearly 50 years, it's been tucked away in a clock tower at Wolverhamptom, along with a copy of my birth certificate, my parents' wedding license, and the certificate of my father's death. They contained facts which are completely new to me. I never knew, for example, that my father had been the manager of a pottery, which failed in the last great slump of the 1930s, or that he was out of work for the last 2 years of his life, or that the cause of his death was uremia, or that I had a third stepbrother, Herbert Stanley, who died at the age of 3. What it proves, I suppose, is that even the past can be altered, or at least how we comprehend it. And yet my feelings remain the same. On the day of my mother's funeral, my Uncle Ernest gave me the wedding ring which he'd taken from her dead hand and told me I mustn't feel bad. I don't. He nodded comfortably, as if he'd dealt with every item on the list. It's best that we remember as she was, he said. Very awkward at times. I loved her, I said. We all did, said my uncle, but she was awkward, just as she was brave. And she'd had enough. She was ready to go. He reamed out his pipe before stuffing the bowl with shag, and he lit it with a kitchen match. I was with her when she died, he said. I looked out of the window for a second, and when I looked back, she'd slipped away. I spoke to her, but she didn't answer. The room was filling with layer upon layer of smoke, and I could not see the expression on my uncle's face. But when he squeezed my hand, I knew that what he was about to tell me was important. "I looked into her eyes," he said. Her eyes were like stars.